Everyone, let's welcome Jimmy Wong to Dragon Talk. Yay!
Yay, roar,
Jimmy!
dragons. Woo!
Woo! Roar.
Very excited to have you here and roar. That was the most enthusiastic roar I've ever heard from a
Roar.
dragon.
Yeah, thank you. I've been practicing for days.
It's dragon talk, not dragon roar.
Yeah, dragon. Hello,
Dragon.
everyone.
Roar.
I'm gonna talk like Smaug. He's got the coolest voice.
That Benedict Cumberbatch. He's got it. Or are you talking about the old school, the Rankin Bass Smaug?
Oh, no, I'm talking about Benedict Cumberbatch.
So good.
Yeah.
Well, we're excited to talk to you because you have, a long history doing lots of, I guess, digital content is the way they call it that. But it was just being, YouTube and video, and now it's holistic. Many folks on our sister brand, Magic the Gathering, know you from hosting tons of stuff in that regard. But you're also a D&D player and fan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Yay.
love all things board game, gameplay, fantasy, and all that. And it's been something I've just been slowly getting more and more into over the past, decade now.
I got to be honest. I have seen you appear in many Magic videos, and I have heard the Magic team talk about you for years. And I always thought, well, he seems cool. Like, why can't he be into D&D? And I didn't know that you also played D&D until we interviewed Chrissy Costanza, who told us about her first time playing D&D, which you were in that game.
Yeah, she is fantastic. I love Chrissy. I think she's just one of the top performers and personalities I've ever met in my entire life. And playing D&D with her was great because she just has incredible natural instinct when it comes to taking a dive, like taking a risk. There's a lot of, I think, just sort of like trepidation for first-time players because they don't know what they're doing. They don't know if they can do stuff. They don't even know if they can ask the DM if they can do stuff and what control they have. So being able to play with someone like Chrissy was really, I think, inspiring because I think a lot of new players can watch that and get a good idea and taste of like, oh, cool, you can really stretch what's happening, in terms of your control over the game, depending on the situation, of course. But, don't be afraid. Definitely take some risks, and you're going to be happier as a result.
That's true. Yeah. It's like that person who's like new to karaoke who like, gets up there with a mic and they start singing and then they feel the song and they go all out. Like it seems like you can do that as a new D&D player, and it's so much more fun when you go, I want to say balls out.
Yeah. Go nuts, right? Like, I'm not saying like take off the seatbelt, but you can push the speed limit a little bit in the game.
Right.
Yeah. Her first experience, I mean, she didn't have any choice but to love D&D. Not like it was a great group she was playing with, but also like about being on the undead horse or the nightmare and carving it in half, basically. Like she had some amazing moments, cinematic moments in the game that I think. What choice did she really have, Jimmy?
I mean, she's right. She was like playing a roguelike character. She could have hidden is the other option and go for a backstab or something. But she's like, no, I'm going to ride this thing. And, obviously, in the situation that we were in, we weren't going to kill a character or like do so much damage that they're out of the fight. But it's also something that means that you're taking the situation and adding your own life to it. And what you might actually do in that situation, which is like go nuts, go a little crazy, do something a little more risky than otherwise. And so I think that's just, again, like good instincts. And obviously it just contributes to a much more visual and fun campaign to watch and listen to.
Yeah, there is a lot to be said for when people are first playing a character or they don't know a lot about the particular class that maybe they're playing, like a rogue maybe should be hiding or stand in the back, or a magic user doesn't need to be up in the fray. But it's just funny, like you said, like to see what their instincts are. It's like, I'm a wizard and I'm going to get up there and I'm going to punch you in the face. And you don't have to do that. You learn.
Yeah. One time I played with someone and their character was just a buff wizard. They maxed out their strength and stuff, and they like, I want to be really bad at spell casting, and that's my thing. Like I'd rather be physically intimidating to people as a wizard, and we all thought that was just hilarious, and he ran with it, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. You got into wizardry school on a athletic scholarship.
Exactly.
And flunked out.
What kind of characters do you gravitate towards? Everybody's got a type. What was the first one you did, and was that?
Yeah. The first character I think I ever made was a monk, because I was definitely into like the how powerful can I be, and monks just had this really broad, set of skills and abilities. It seemed like they could do a little bit of everything, so I loved that. I was like, great, this is awesome. I'm going to run around, punch people a bunch, whirlwind, fly around, dodge things. You can't touch me. I rolled really well on my stat generation as well, so I just was really overpowered for the campaign. And then after that, I like dabbling a lot. I play games like League of Legends and World of Warcraft, and I when I grew up playing those games, I played a warrior and a pretty boring hack and slash tank, whatever. And so in gameplay, I like to just sort of test around with other stuff. So to date, I played a monk, I played sorcerer, I played paladins. I kind of like just seeing what all the different classes are, and it's fun to learn. I think I want to do a druid at some point. I played a bard as well, so I'm kind of all around. But I tend to stray away from just the fighty McFight characters, the ones that are much more physical, just because I've done that before in gameplay, and so that doesn't interest me as much in the wonderful world of Dungeons and Dragons.
Nice. What was the first edition that you played? Was it always fifth, or was it did you do?
I think I started with fourth, so I never played growing up. And the first campaign I played was like in 2012 or 13. So I guess if you can connect that to whenever
that would have been the tail
edition
end
that was.
Of fourth, yeah.
Yeah. I think sorcerers were really powerful at that point too. That's what someone told me. I remember casting Counterspell once and being like, "Whoa, this is not fair." I'm pretty sure a sorcerer can do that.
And then now you got to, there's all this talk about whether it's okay to do that as a dungeon master. Have your enemy spellcasters counterspell healing spells from your PCs. That always feels wrong.
Yeah, typically Counterspell, and even in Magic the Gathering, right, is one of the very controversial things to do because people don't consider it fun to stop what someone else is doing. It's more fun to allow players to let the thing I'm doing resolve and then deal with the after effects. So this sort of you wasted the full spell slot, you can't even do the thing, creates a lot of feel bad sometimes. So I don't blame anyone for wanting to make your own sort of house adjustments to that sort of gameplay if you think that your players are going to appreciate the version you're making better.
I'm not going to lie. I love playing a blue deck that is just counterspelling people in Arena.
Oh, you're that kind of person. I see.
I was looking down at my shirt because I do have, there was a swag t-shirt that had Nope in with the blue mana symbol.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
I got a kick out of that. And I only have like one or two decks like that, but I have had games that have gone, 45 minutes long just because that's all I'm doing is just not doing damage or anything, just preventing everyone else from doing stuff. And even after a while, it's a little old.
Mm-hmm.
Fun stuff. So yeah, you've been doing, Magic has this thing where even if you do counterspell or do all these things, it has that kind of dueling nature of you're having this magic battle back and forth. And I've always thought that Dungeons and Dragons could do more of that. Not necessarily like the countering like we're talking about, but have those old school wizards duels shown in dramatic ways. Do you have any ideas on how to do that as a dungeon master?
Magic the Gathering? Interesting. Add that into Dungeons and Dragons. It's interesting because the initiative system and the way that combat works, you can spend 3 hours in combat, but only a minute of real time passes. Mm-hmm. That sort of creates, I think it's always down to each play group. I think if the dungeon master wants to structure combat in a way that does feel a little more 1v1 or even 2v1 or just has more interaction, they could probably just do away with the initiative system and figure out a way to make it feel more like, all right, you do something and then they respond, then they do something and you respond. But it's so hard because you're basically creating a new system at that point.
Yeah.
So it's tough. I think initiative has a lot of upsides and downsides. But it's one of those things where there's tons of role-playing systems out there. I'm sure you could glean some inspiration from somewhere else to make it a little more interactive or to raise the stakes, right, in some way.
I don't know why you have to do that, Greg.
No. I just like the idea of trying to do the the Gandalf Saruman battle or the old school one from Sword in the Stone with Mad Madam Mim and Merlin doing their polymorphs back and forth. I just love that.
Maybe the key is to do less dice rolling in general, unless it's more significant decisions or harder to cast things. Because we were talking about support roles, right? Let's say I need to jump up onto that ledge and someone is there and they can give me a boost up. I don't think that character needs to roll for it because they are, if they're the kind of person that could just do it, then do it. Now, I think maybe it's up to the characters to be like, well, actually, I injured my leg. So when I do it, maybe I slip a little bit. And then the dungeon master can be like, okay, cool, take a 1d2 of damage or whatever it is, or 1d4. But I think, like, in general, it's tough the more you have to roll for stuff because it adds that layer of RNG that sometimes I think personally that the dice never lie. But there are times when, like, it adds, I think, a layer of complexity that maybe you can start experimenting with, take it back a notch, figure out what has to get rolled for, what doesn't. I think perception is one of those things where, like, you can just get a base perception of stuff. And then if you want to really see if there's something going on, then you have to pass some sort of higher check or whatever.
That's smart. Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to reinvent D&D on the D&D podcast. I'm just giving ideas for, if your play group wants to have more fun, ask them what they want and ask them what the pain points are. And I think, like, build towards that. I think the best play groups have a dungeon master that's really incongruent and sort of on the same wavelength as the people playing with them.
For sure. Yeah. And what you're describing is not like redoing D&D. Like, that's just, personal play style of a dungeon master, right? Like, I think
house rules or whatever.
Yeah, right. Or I mean, that's the way I do perception checks, right? It's only like when you're trying to find something that's hard to perceive that a roll is necessary. But if you're like, what color is this? Then you're like, well, I don't know, roll perception to find out what color it is. I'm like, that doesn't make as much sense.
Yeah, you could just see.
Some people like rolling those dice, though. They want to just roll.
True.
It could be a fun downtime activity, perhaps. Taking your players to go see a wizard's duel in the neighboring town or something. As a wizard, normally. I don't want
That's what you do? You're a wizard, Shelley?
Yeah.
Nice.
I do. I have strayed a little. I tried to be a ranger for a while because I thought it's too hard to manage my spells and I just want to shoot a bow. But
right.
But I always come back. I always go back to the magic.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, it's not nice. Me. It's so far away from the real me. That is my fantasy. I want to do that.
Very nice. Yeah.
So now, are you also a dungeon master, or are you mostly a player?
No, I don't think I have the mental acuity sometimes to do a DM role because there's a lot of prep, right? You can't just walk in and be like, all right, well, I've taken an improv class. Let's figure it out.
Greg, you can if you're Greg.
Yeah.
That's exactly his strategy.
That's the way I do it. Yeah, it's true.
I mean, I think, like, because I've had a couple of campaigns that are like, I've done ones like Curse of Strahd. We very much were by the book and we added a few things here and there. And it was nice because the DM didn't have to do as much prep work and they could focus more on, like, how are they going to customize it a little bit. And then I've seen campaigns run where it's like the DM comes in with a full-on map. Everyone gets an image on their phone or iPad or whatever and is going off of that. And it's super interactive. There's sound effects and all that stuff. I'm the kind of person, I think, where, like, if I wanted to do it right, I would kind of get down that rabbit hole of, like, all right, we're going to set the mood. We're going to light this candle tonight. We're going to use these miniatures. I'm going to borrow these sets and blah, 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 blah. So I think, like, there's too much perfectionism in me to be a DM right now. There's too much work and I don't have the time to put it in. I love being a player, though, and seeing what gets thrown at me.
Because you're a filmmaker too, right? So, like, there's a bit of that in dungeon mastering.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think
it's like directing.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, directing and hoping that your actors / players want to follow the direction and don't completely throw a wrench in your plans, because that's tough. Some people just are there to create chaos, and there's a lot of fun in that. But I think a good dungeon master knows how to balance that with the campaign and also letting the players do what they want when they need to. Because that's the joy of D&D for a lot of people. It's just like, oh, that was so much fun when X person did this or whatever. And that adds on this whole, like, wow, had they not just decided to tackle them instead of doing the normal thing that the DM decided, we wouldn't have been down this thing and doing X, Y, and Z and learning this about the character. So I think that's fun.
For sure.
Yeah. I think that's why I don't want to be a dungeon master. It's just too much.
It's a lot. It's pressure too. Yeah, exactly. I'm with you.
You know, like all the different player styles like you're talking about, it's, you know, I would find it really hard to balance letting them do what they want to do because it's their game, but also, like, not to the point where it's stressing me and I just don't know what to do with the rules. Yeah. So, I don't know.
We're trying to play to relax, right?
Yeah.
There is a push and a pull for sure. Like you want to be, oh yeah, this is your game. You want to make it awesome, but then you got to have some restrictions, or it feels just like, well, then nothing means anything. You know?
Right.
Yeah, and that's a hard balance, especially you're right with different personalities and different play types because those rules, are different for each person.
And you don't always know. Especially if you're playing with new people, like who someone is in real life can be completely different to who they are as a player. So you don't always know the player types, and they don't even know their player types until you start playing, and then what happens? What happens if you don't like them as a player? You kill their character. What do you do? My first dungeon master also, I feel like he was an adversary to the player. Like it always felt like it was us against him, and it's been really hard for me to shake that because I've never had another dungeon master like that. And the second dungeon master I had, I kind of like was aggressive.
Right.
Like, I'm ready for you this time.
And they were a team player or whatever, right?
Yeah, and he was like, I'm just here to help you. Like, I want you to succeed. I want to set things up so that you're having a good time with it. And it's always been hard for me. This has been like, over a decade of me having to remember, like, the dungeon master is my friend. The dungeon master. I don't know how to shake that feeling sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, first impressions do make a big difference. Every experience is different. Every dungeon master style is different. I think I appreciate whatever people want to do that makes it feel best for them. At the end of the day, you're spending hours and hours with a group of people. It's got to be something that everyone wants to get through together. And if you're creating an environment that isn't going towards that as a player or DM, then that might be something that just to keep note of, right? And I think a lot of times the best play groups are the ones that can have honest conversations with everyone and be like, hey, so for the next one, I love that we're doing X, Y, and Z, but we have to keep it a little bit less on this thing because I don't want to have to add on 3 extra nights of D&Ding because we're always going to get the barter for the best deal at the shop, every time, or whatever that thing is,
I've had entire sessions that is that for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of where people who come outside of this fandom always ask, right? How many times have family members or folks who don't play Dungeons and Dragons were like, well, how do you win? When is it over? And you're like, well, this isn't Monopoly. This isn't Clue. This isn't like there's a finite end to it. It keeps going. Or people are like, where's the board? And you're like, well, we don't play with minis. And you're like, well, what's that all about? So I know, Jimmy, you have a lot of experience in board games and coming from a lot of Magic fandom. So how do you equate those two? Where like this is a much more of an open-ended, story-driven game of Dungeons and Dragons versus the hyper-competitive other types of games out there?
Yeah, it's tough. I think like the main thing is just like it's storytelling at the end of the day, and so people understand like we're telling a story together. Everyone plays a character and a role, and you can bring your own backstory and history, and it's really easy to get into, and it requires a different amount of commitment from everyone. You don't need to be walking in dressed as your character and stuff to play. But embodying it, you may find more fun in that. I think like in general, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure book, but the adventure gets written by you the entire time. The Dungeon Master is like a facilitator for that and creates the overall structure. But there is a lot of joy in sort of group storytelling. And if you're doing it with a close group of friends, if you love eating dinners with these people because you always end up sharing great stories from, your past together, like it's got that feeling to it. You're really working together as a whole and everyone's adding and changing things and making it their own. So it's kind of like a real fun, personalized story where you get to be the main character and tell the story at the same time through your actions.
Yeah. We're talking about misconceptions too. Like, Greg, you basically rattled off the top 3 questions I hear all the time from new players. Where's the board? How do you win? When does it end? But also like the storytelling angle, because we always tell, like, we're telling stories together. I think it was my brother actually. He was under the impression that like you literally had to tell a story. Like, okay, Jimmy, you go first.
That's a different type of game.
And then you pass it on, and now it's like, okay, now I have to finish telling that story. And then Greg would go after, and that was like, he was like, hell no. I'm not creative enough to come up with my own story. Like, I don't want to do that. And I wonder now, how many people have thought that as well? Because that's really, the story is just part of the dialogue. It's not,
Yeah.
you don't have to come prepared with your own story.
Yeah, I can understand why it's really intimidating for people because of that. They may not understand what's happening. Honestly,
Yeah.
I think everyone's first D&D character, and this goes for acting as well and improv, everyone's first couple of D&D characters or role-playing characters are just basically different versions of themselves.
Yeah.
And so finding out, how to comfortably express that, and it's really important for the rest of the play group as well to be on the same page, that no one is there to make fun of someone else for making a mistake or to, belittle anyone else, and creating a not toxic environment so everyone feels safe experimenting and sort of reaching into themselves and presenting another aspect or whatever it is, but they get to do it through the safety of their character, So I think that's something to always emphasize.
Yeah. And so, you mentioned your acting career. That's awesome that you're in so many things that people recognize, but probably, from this year, Mulan. What was it like being in something so big? What a big production that must have been.
So I rolled a warrior character, a soldier technically. Pretty low stats though, because we obviously had to get stronger and train. It was a really fun experience. It was definitely something that I will always remember and always reflect on and think about. Being in something that big, you quickly realize how little control you have. So it's not like a D&D campaign, right? I can't go up to the director or take a look at the script and being like, you know what? I think my character would actually do this here. Because there is, behind that script and that day of shooting and that scene, there have been months and years of preparation leading up to that. And, 300 people on set waiting to execute the scene and have it get done. So
you're like, I want to do it differently. Let's just,
yeah.
I'm going to multi-class.
Flip it upside down.
You're kind of more of an NPC, I think, in that world than a full-blown like D&D character. And there are a lot of times when I've made content online and make YouTube videos and stuff. And I did a series called Video Game High School back in the day where it's a much more collaborative process because I was best friends with the director and one of them was my brother. So like that led to a lot more like, you know what? I don't think this feels right. What if it was more along the lines of this? And then you kind of like bally it back and forth and then you land on a place where everyone's happier as a result. So I think the bigger the budget of a movie is, the less of that you generally have. Now, there are some directors out there that will always push for their actors to improv on screen and to add their own flavor and element, but Mulan was one of those projects with so many moving parts. There's so many times where we'd be on set and there would be 20 people on horses that are trying to keep them calm and ready to film and that need to perform a very specific executed action to when the camera says rolling, go, and all that stuff. And that is much more important than whether or not you want to say your line differently or do something differently. At that point, you're just trying to make sure that you're not messing up, if anything. And that you're giving the director and the team what they need for the scene to work. So it's a bit more practical. And the creative expression, especially on the sort of like the less major characters, is not as much. But that's not to say that you're not acting anymore. Like, no, you're still definitely acting. You're still definitely in the scene, in the character. You've done the prerequisite training and all the work to get there. Just the way it's executed is a little more different. And it's a special thing to still be a part of that because you get to watch all these people working together in conjunction, in congruity, and making something that is much larger than the sum of their parts with some of the coolest and most talented people you've ever worked with.
What were the costumes like as a D&D fan? I bet, you're like, oh man, I finally get some swords and armor to be able to swing around.
Very uncomfortable. I don't know how people did it back in the day.
Lots of oil and lube, maybe, perhaps.
Yeah, the armor's pretty heavy, even though it's not made of real metal. And the swords we have are all prop swords as well, so they're like a PVC pipe. It's kind of like LARPing, really. Basically LARPing. It was like LARPing. So, we weren't used to carrying around, 25, 30 pounds of clothing on us. So we always, for me, I was just like, I always made the costumers cinch it as tight as possible so that I could carry more weight, not just on my shoulders, but like on my waist. And there would be points when you'd go back and you'd be like, oh my gosh, I am so sore just from wearing that all day. And it wasn't even the real thing. But it was cool because everything as an actor helps you get more into the role if you let it. So the armor, when you put it on, you look at yourself in the mirror, all of a sudden you are that thing a little bit more. It's not like a black box theater where you're running up in front of people and you don't have that costume change, right? Being in a movie, you're trying to establish the universe with so many different elements, all the way down to the socks and stuff that we wore as well, and the shoes and all that stuff to be historically accurate and to look correct and right on camera, as well as to match the overall design and all that stuff. And, we had, I think, 200 background actors at one point that were all training to basically march together, do military exercises together, and to build out the background. And so when you're able to walk with those people and to be in those groups and to be trained by the real people in the armor, I think you start to learn through experience what it might feel like to be that person that will contribute to your character a little bit, the way you handle yourself, hold yourself, say your lines, all that. So I think having that experience was great, because typically, the costumes I wear are a jacket, a hoodie, some pants. And so a lot of the acting is up to the actor to sort of fill in the blanks there. But once you start putting on the armor and all that stuff, a lot of those questions get sort of auto answered, and you already, it's a lot easier to arrive at the conclusions that you might have taken a lot longer to, and you don't have those sort of contextual clues.
Is that a contributing factor to why you play spellcasters now? Because you're like, I don't want to wear armor like that ever again.
I was thinking as he was talking about the armor, I'm like, that's another reason why I'm going to just be a wizard. I like loose, baggy robes.
Yeah, if I ever had to film a real life version of my D&D characters, I want the comfiest outfit ever.
Yeah. Wizard's pajamas.
I like putting distance between me and an enemy, because getting clobbered for, 3d8 or something is just not a pleasant feeling when that's like 90% of your life total.
Yeah, exactly.
True. But I think that's why every, fighter D&D player out there should at least LARP or have some experience wearing that stuff, because it's a huge part of what life was like, right? If we're trying to simulate that kind of, medieval fantasy, you kind of have to really realize, like, no, it takes a half hour to put on that armor, and you can't just go to sleep in it and wake up in it when, you're getting ambushed or something like that. Like,
totally.
It adds a realism level to it that you have that nobody else has at this point.
It's true. Lucky me.
And I've got the scars to prove it.
Yeah.
Okay, so for about a decade or so, you've been a content creator, creating digital content. I'm trying to think. Okay, a decade ago would be 2011. I'm trying to think, like, was this yesterday. Something, right? How do you get into this work, and how do you stay inspired to
content creation?
Yes.
So I started making videos because I was failing at getting acting jobs back when I moved here in 2010, 2011. And I was like, I don't want to act on YouTube, but I played music my whole life. This is a talent that I have fostered and trained at for hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours at this point. And so maybe I can translate that into making some videos just to get my creative outlet going. And I knew how to edit. I knew how to film stuff on a basic level. So I had all of the tools in front of me, as well as a really good environment to do stuff in, because I lived with my brother, who had been making YouTube videos for 2 years at that point. And so I sort of got into content creation as a response to not having much else to do as an actor, because instead of waiting around all day submitting and hoping to get an audition, there's so much free time and downtime that it would be really frustrating to not do anything with it. So I ended up playing a lot of video games and stuff too, obviously, and goofing off and watching, all of Avatar: The Last Airbender on Nickelodeon. And there were a lot of sort of those moments. But the thing that really drove me and gave me passion was like making a video and making a song and seeing the views click up, like that's always a very adrenaline pumping thing. So there was a lot of outside inspiration in terms of like, you are in a great environment that will allow you to safely do this. And if you fall, ain't no thing. Pick yourself up, do it again. No one's going to remember. It's the internet. It still is kind of the same in a lot of ways, as long as you're not doing things that inherently make you cancelable. And so that's how I fell into content creation. And to the second part of your question, which is like staying motivated and keeping it going, that is something that I've definitely struggled with over the years, because you're trying to balance a couple of things. You're trying to balance your personal life, you're trying to balance your work life, you're trying to balance the second work life of acting and the training that you might need or the practice that you might need. And you're also trying to watch videos and learn from your friends and collaborate with them on that and do the whole YouTube thing. So I think the thing that was really difficult about it was not knowing what my personal North Star was for a while. And I was really lucky that I got contacted by a really awesome artist and a creator and just creative named Glenn Kino, who reached out after I sort of made my first viral video and really loved what I did and thought that there was something there that he wanted to, extrapolate a little more from, talk to me, and essentially mentor me in a lot of ways. And he became my first Los Angeles mentor. And it wasn't like we met every single day and talked. It was just like we met 4 or 5 times over the course of a year. I went in and I presented some stuff to his company about making videos online and some lessons that I've learned. That was like the first time I did consulting work. And through his lens and through the wisdom and experience that someone else had in the creative fields, I was able to garner a lot more knowledge about how to keep pursuing my goals. And like, he just challenged me the first time I met him, and I'm like, what, 22? He's like, what's your 6-year goal? And I was just like, 6 years, I'm gonna be 20. I haven't even thought ahead to tomorrow. And so questions like that, and him explaining why they're important, and also letting me figure out for myself why they're important to have those sorts of longer term goals and figure out what your North Star or golden thread is. That really helped me solidify slowly over time, right? None of this happened overnight, more as to why I was doing what I was doing, and helped me say no to certain things and yes to other things, or to pursue things I wouldn't have gone for otherwise. So I really think it's important to have mentorship, especially these days, people that have had life experiences and wisdom to share, and that are inherently interested in you as a person and your development. And they don't, again, need to be super hands-on. They're not like teaching you how to forge a sword like an old apprenticeship, but they can give you some just like, right? Like even just one paragraph of thought from them could change your life forever, depending on what they say. So I think those opportunities are all around us all the time. And I would encourage everyone out there that's sort of struggling with finding that passion and all that stuff to look to other peers and people in the space that may be able to give you that. And sometimes your mentors could be your parents, and they could be your family. Other times it could be your boss at work, or someone that is managing you, or it could just be someone that you find online and they're the kind of person that mentors other people. So you should message them and ask them if they have advice, or be willing to check out your stuff and give you some tips or whatever it is, and if that doesn't work, that's totally fine. Just keep searching and looking for that.
Shelly, I think you're my mentor.
Aw. I would say a lot of men could use more women as mentors, or just people with higher emotional intelligence in general. But that's a whole nother subject.
For sure. Yeah. And then I think, something that you touched on there was something that I think has been front and center for a lot of people, is that idea of burning out, right? And that having you need to be able to have this churn, especially as a YouTuber or content creator, and in the D&D space, it's people who are like, well, I got to have 3 different shows that I'm streaming and being a part of, and not realizing that you're burning the candle at both ends, and how to say no in a gracious way, but also for your own mental health and things like that.
Yeah, definitely don't be afraid to say no. It's the most, your life. It's your life.
Yeah.
Live it. Prioritize yourself in ways that, obviously aren't selfish, but being selfish is not a bad thing inherently either. I think there's a lot of negative connotation to that. But yeah, know how to take time for yourself, know when you need rest, know when you don't, you need to close the front door of your house and no one else keeps coming in. There's all sorts of little things that I've learned slowly over my life, and I'm turning 34 this month, and I thought I knew everything at 22, and being 33 and going through a whole new slew of experiences and humbling moments makes me realize I'm just at the beginning, in a lot of ways, of a spiritual journey and all that. So stay humble.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think about, it's an old reference, but Help by the Beatles, where John Lennon is basically saying, I thought I knew everything when I was 22, and it turns out I didn't, and I don't even more so now. Like I don't know, and even that he was at the top of his game when he was writing that song, I see that kind of happening now, and especially with my own personal life of just being like, yep, I wish I kind of had that confidence and fire that I had when I was 22, but at the same time, I'm glad that I lived through it and was able to prioritize what needed to be prioritized.
Yeah.
If you had that confidence and fire at 22 and the knowledge that you have at 32 or 42 or 52, then you wouldn't have done those things at 22.
Correct.
Which is, that's when I moved across the country to Seattle from upstate New York, never having been to Seattle. I had no reason to come here. And now, like, I've been here for a long time because I'm too scared to go back. Moving takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. Obviously, I have a lot more roots here too, but had I known the things that I know, like as an adult or an older adult, maybe I wouldn't have taken the chances I did in my 20s.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom there, which is just like, I think in a lot of ways, the universe does work in perfect ways. Right? Like, looking, for instance, there's so many times that I've done this comparison and it's so toxic, which is just like, well, this actor got their big break at 23 and look at where they're at now. And I'm 10 years older than that. How am I ever going to succeed? Blah, 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 blah. Like, I could go on forever. But it's not right. Like, you don't want to compare yourself to the people that might be the exception to the norm, because, you know, it's not going to give you the insight that you want. And so whatever your journey is, I think the moment that you start realizing and thinking more about your journey, and maybe listening to this podcast is part of that journey, who knows? That's just how it was meant to pan out. And, you know, the world and the universe in your gut are going to give you a lot of signs and signposts and directions to go. And it's sort of up to you whether you want to listen to it and pursue it, or if it's not the time for you to do it, then you may not be at that level yet to do that. And that's totally okay. Because if I tried to teach myself the lessons I know now at the age of 22, I probably been like, screw you, old man, get out of here. I know what I'm doing.
Boomer.
You know? And that would have been very important for me to learn from. I wouldn't have learned it otherwise, that I was totally wrong or whatever it was, right? Or I needed to adjust my viewpoint on this or that. So I think being open is a huge part of it, but, you know, don't ever feel bad for not getting there as fast as someone else, because that's their life. It sure isn't yours. And you couldn't be two different people, right? We're all humans on this podcast, but I haven't lived a minute in any of your issues. I have no clue what it's like to be you, what's going on in your life and all that stuff. So I think it's like, it's a trap. Don't walk into that trap. Roll the perception check. Know that someone else's experiences don't need to define yours.
Yep. And now the trap for me is that, like, oh, you know, everybody's saying those, basically trying to echo that sentiment, being like, you know, just because they made it big when they were young doesn't, you know, mean. And there are all these novelists who are examples of like, oh, they got published their first novel when they were 51. Isn't that great? Right. And then I'm like, shit, that's only 10 years away from now. I got to hurry up and write my first novel.
Yeah, totally.
Or else I'm going to be a even bigger
You're missing
footnote.
the point.
I'm totally missing the point. But one of those things, this is a hard transition, but I'm going to make it anyway.
Let's do it.
One of those things that's always, at least, you know, colloquially as well as within the building at Wizards, was that Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering are two very separate things, and then they're never going to, work together, cross IPs. None of that. And then we saw the success of Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, as well as
so awesome.
Theros. And now we've got Adventures in the Forgotten Realms coming from Magic the Gathering. It's a set, 4 Magic cards that uses all D&D stuff. And we don't know much more other than that, but we're super excited about even more crossover between those two brands now.
Yeah, they just announced Universes Beyond as well, which Hasbro was like, check it out. Magic the Gathering made us $816 million last year. And instead of just being a company we own, you get your own division. You are a central column of Hasbro, which is obviously, I think for a lot of players, been raising a lot of eyebrows, because it's like, what is going to happen to the future of our game? And I think it's like, guess what? More people are going to play it. That's what the future is. This is how, you know, the hobby world and the capitalistic world works. So I think it's important to always have good perspective when it comes to this sort of stuff. You know, all of us as gamers and all of us as enthusiasts and hobbyists and fans, we are always going to feel a certain amount of entitlement to the things that we love because they defined us growing up, or they're the things that other people made fun of us for growing up. So we cling on to it even harder as an adult. I think, like, one, don't get testy about games and stuff like that. You know, at the end of the day, you're going to outlive Dungeons and Dragons probably, and you're going to outlive Magic the Gathering too. Like, you've got a long, long, beautiful life ahead of you. It's not like D&D is your child. It's not like you gave birth to this thing and now you need to make sure it goes to the right school and dates the right people. There's a lot of stuff that's always going to be out of our control. And if you look anywhere in the world, you'll see similar analogs here and there. And so I'm personally excited. I think it's great that Magic and games like Magic are able to spread to more people, because I recognize the inherent positivities of the game that are really, 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 really important to me, which is like, it's a great teaching tool. It's amazing for helping people learn like mathematics, decision making, assessment ability, critical thinking, like all of these super important things that I don't think schools teach, but games do. And that's why I love games so much, is because you'll find versions of this in all games. And so I think when Magic does crossovers like this, they are doing it because I know a lot of the designers, right? I know a lot of people that work there. They genuinely have a passion to make the best game possible. And so whether or not it was their decision to do a Dungeons and Dragons crossover or a Warhammer crossover, that's not going to affect their passion for the game at the end of the day, because that's their job and their living and their life. You know, I don't think someone like Mark Rosewater is just going to be like, well, I'm just going to try less hard now because it's not the Magic universe. You know, if anything, they're going to try harder to make sure that it's something that, you know, is widely accepted and brings in new players, whatever it ends up being. So I'm really excited for the D&D collaboration. I think that is a perfect, right? Makes perfect sense to me, both from a company standpoint. Wizards owns D&D as well. And also they have people like James Wyatt that's working on the set. That is a very prolific writer, both for Magic and Dungeons and Dragons. You couldn't ask for, right? You can't just go out on a hiring website and being like, I'm looking for a longtime fantasy author that has vast experience in both of these fields and can write something that's genuine for the thing. But you have those resources available. And so I think that's what also gets me like kind of stoked, which is like, I know we're going to get a quality product. Now, obviously I can't guarantee anything until I see the cards and all that stuff, but it's a collaboration that makes sense. I hope it brings more players into the game, and I hope it brings the love of the strategy world of Magic to more people as well.
Yeah. And I've always been, you know, hugely thankful and just grateful that so many of the you know, designers who've made their bread and butter doing Magic cards have always been D&D fans, and they've always expressed this love of all of the storytelling that Dungeons and Dragons is able to do. And, you know, vice versa. The people on the D&D team have always loved that kind of strategic, you know, play, which is there in Dungeons and Dragons, but not quite as mechanics based as Magic is. And then just being able to, you know, have both. I mean, I'm a you know, tactical board gamer too. I like that type of you know, chess-like, you know, strategy that you end up doing. And there's some of it in Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm excited to get all of that together in one thing, and then have that IP just really, really brought to life with the amazing artists that Magic always brings to bear, as well as you know, some of the fun mechanics that they've been experimenting with Zendikar and stuff with the party mechanics. You know,
I heard a statistic that Magic and D&D is responsible for like 70% of the fantasy art that gets created every year. I don't know how true that is, but it would make sense considering just how much stuff gets put out. And I think, you know, I'm friends with a lot of artists too, and seeing their work pop up in my feed always brings a smile to my face. And knowing that games and properties like Magic and D&D are creating those opportunities for up and coming artists is also really, I think, exciting for me as another fellow creative.
Yeah, definitely.
And bringing people in from different backgrounds and nationalities and things like that. Like
totally.
That's the thing that's really exciting to me about you know, both brands really is that infusion of so many different voices, because there's people from all walks of life have enjoyed games and played games, and especially fantasy. Yeah. And I love seeing the different flavors that are, you know, like Theros having this Greek god, you know, thing, and Ravnica's, you know, guilds really just kind of brought to life in different ways, and all the characters that are able to be brought to bear, and you know, having people embody those. I don't know. It's a nice little amalgam and mix, and I just can't wait for not only what's coming out for this year, but, you know, years to come.
That's the beauty of fantasy, I think, is you get all of that. You can be anything you want. You can do anything you want, really, in a lot of ways, and it's accessible. So I think Dungeons and Dragons is the most accessible thing in the world. You don't even need a single piece of paper to get started if you really just want to try role playing, right? Like there is a way for you to enjoy this without needing to go deep into the rules or whatever it is. It could just literally be you and a friend sitting there and creating a little scenario and running through it, right? Congrats, you just played a version of Dungeons and Dragons, of a fantasy world type game. And you can be whatever you want, doesn't matter who you are, and you can represent yourself however you like to, which is always cool.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
I think there was always a misconception too that the people who play D&D and the people who play Magic are vastly different. Because it turns out they're not. There is a lot of crossover there.
Totally.
You're the embodiment of that.
I guess so. Yeah, I'm the living embodiment.
You are right there.
Magic the Dragons. on Dragon Talk.
I love it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here, being a part of the amazing community, and seeing your face and your personality and your just enthusiasm about games. I think has just brought more people into both of these communities, and so thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate obviously having the chance to just chat about D&D because I don't really talk about it much ever.
Yes, to the point where I did not know you were a D&D player.
There you go. Yeah,
and
I'm like a secret D&D player. I don't play that much publicly.
The secret's out now.
Secret is actually out now, especially podcast listeners will know,
and we know that you are fully capable of saying no to things, and we really appreciate that you did not say no to the invitation to appear on Dragon Talk.
No, of course not. Every time I get a call from another 206 number, I'm like, yeah, because I grew up in Seattle. So I have a lot of affinity with, right, there was a period in the 90s and the early thousands where there was just a new card game every single week. I got really close with a group called 2i Interactive Imagination back in the day. That was a Seattle company that made another card game. I had a whole fan forum for that. And, I think like my passion for this world has always been there. So I definitely love Seattle for breeding and creating that sort of world for the rest of the world to enjoy.
That's what Seattle's all about. Plus, it's got mountains. That's the as an East Coaster.
Trees and clean air.
Yeah.
Yep. Green.
And now it's entering that good period of Seattle weather too, where
the best part. Visit Seattle during the summer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
It's going to be beautiful. So everybody come to Seattle. It's where it's at. You get to be around people who make games all the time. That's it. That's the only industry of Seattle.
All we do here.
Yeah, that's the only one. I think if people start looking up the companies that originated in the Pacific Northwest, they would be shocked how many there are. There are so many.
It's huge. I think it's a lot to do because of Wizards, as you said. Like getting that 70% of card art. It's also that level of designers. Either they've moved on and then just stayed in the area because it's so beautiful.
The cube scene is huge too in Seattle, and that's the whole if you're a dungeon master, you're also someone that I think that would make a Magic the Gathering cube. So a lot of crossover.
I've always wanted to get into cubes, and I only we'll have to have you back on and have us describe exactly how that works, because I see.
I don't know. I would tell you to go to YouTube and look it up. That would be my answer.
Gelatinous cube?
Cube is
Gelatinous cubes.
Is a prepackaged design experience that is draftable, so you just get 8 of your friends around. It's you choose all the cards in the cube, you make them into fake booster packs, and then you get to create your own archetypes and stuff. You can make one that's just your favorite parts of Magic. You can do one that's Dungeons and Dragons themed soon. And it's like a standalone experience that you can always bust out. You don't need to pay anything for it. It's a lot of fun. There's tons of different versions, and the designers the most of them I think are in Seattle, honestly.
Because there's tens of thousands of Magic cards, right? So you're just like, I'm going to make my own mini set, essentially, right?
This is the world I want to play in. I really like the mechanics from this one. I love these types of creatures. Let's do those archetypes.
Yeah. That's super fun. And you're right. That is a lot of what Dungeon Masters like about picking the monsters out of the monster manual. This is my world that I'm going to have you guys play in.
It is. It's world building.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jimmy. What's a good place for people to go to and check out all the stuff that you're doing?
So I mostly post about everything on my Twitter. You can always find me at JFWONG, JF Wong. And you'll every time something new comes out, like a video for my Magic stuff, I'll retweet it. So you can always just see it there. And that's probably the best place to find me. It's also JF Wong on Instagram and all that stuff too.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I can't wait for more from you in the years and months to come. I know we've been talking around a lot of secrets we all have, and I can't wait to let them all out of the bag.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about the Dungeons and Dragons set when it comes out finally.
Yeah, yes. We'll create our own little cube for it. I guess it'll be its own cube, but never mind.
Thank you both. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jimmy. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, guys.